Imagine the scene in every vivid detail. It is 8:43 in the morning on July 2nd, 1937. Aboard her Lockheed Electra, Amelia Earhart has been flying for 18 hours and 43 minutes without pause. Her eyes, red with exhaustion, search in vain across the endless blue of the ocean. The fuel gauge sinks toward the critical mark. Fred Noonan, her navigator, calculates and recalculates their position again and again. He murmurs softly, "We must have passed Howland." Meanwhile, just a few miles away aboard the Coast Guard cutter Itasca, radio operator Leo Bellarts hears the most harrowing transmission of his career. "Amelia," tense voice static, Q, calling Itasca, "we're right above you, but we can't see you. Fuel running dangerously low." Operator Bellarts, "Earhart, can you hear me? Transmit on 3105 for a direction finder." I repeat, 3105. "We can't make radio contact, flying at 1,000 feet altitude. We are on line 157337, waiting." Those were her last recorded words. What followed was silence. A silence that has lasted 87 years. But this story does not begin with a disappearance. It begins with a woman who refused to live by the rules of her time, a pioneer who shattered boundaries. The question is inevitable. What chain of decisions led to this fatal moment? And why, nearly a century later, do we remain obsessed with solving her mystery? Perhaps the answer lies not only in that fateful day, but in the extraordinary life that led her there. To understand the end, we must return to the beginning, to the days when a young woman from Kansas had not yet dared to dream of flight. Atchison, Kansas, 1908. Little Amelia Mary Earhart, just 10 years old, builds what she calls a roller coaster, a homemade ramp on the roof of her family's tool shed. Her sister Muriel would later recall she threw herself off again and again, tearing skirts and scraping knees, determined to feel even a second of flight. But her first real encounter with an airplane was profoundly disappointing. At the Iowa State Fair, her father paid 50 cents for her to see a Curtiss biplane. Amelia would later write, "It was a thing of rusty wire and wood that seemed entirely uninteresting to me." The true spark ignited during the First World War, while she volunteered as a nurse's aide in a military hospital in Toronto. Wounded pilots shared stories of aerial combat that captured her imagination. One of them, Captain Robert Gray, told her, "A woman like you should fly. You've got the nerves for it." In 1920, now living in California, her father paid $10 for a 10-minute flight with pilot Frank Hawkes. Upon landing, she told her family, "I've discovered what I want to do with my life." Her first lessons cost $1,000, a fortune in 1921. She worked as a photographer, a truck driver, and even at a telephone company to pay for them. Her instructor, Neta Snook, would later recall, "Amelia wasn't naturally gifted, but her determination was ferocious. She practiced maneuvers until she mastered them flawlessly." She bought her first airplane, a yellow Kinner Airster biplane she affectionately named the Canary. In October of 1922, she set her first world record, a women's altitude record of 14,000 feet. But that was only the warm-up for what was to come. Do you think Amelia's stubborn spirit, forged in that rebellious childhood, was her greatest strength, or her Achilles heel? Share your thoughts in the comments. April 1928. The telephone rang at the boarding house in Boston where Amelia worked as a social worker. The call came from Captain Hilton H. Rayleigh. "Miss Earhart, would you be interested in becoming the first woman to cross the Atlantic?" There was one crucial detail. She would only be a passenger. "I was just a sack of potatoes," she later confessed bitterly. But that flight as baggage aboard the Friendship in June of 1928 catapulted her to international fame. Upon landing in Wales, newspapers hailed her as Lady Lindy, comparing her to Charles Lindbergh. George Putnam, the publishing magnate who had orchestrated the flight, immediately saw her potential. He organized a lecture tour, a book, 20 hours, 40 minutes, and eventually became her husband. Amelia's proposal, however, was as unconventional as she was. "I want you to understand that I am opposed to marriage. I must retain a fundamental freedom." Putnam accepted her terms, and they married in 1931 under a contract that allowed Amelia to divorce after 1 year if she was unhappy. Meanwhile, she was setting genuine records, the first woman to fly solo across the United States and back, August of 1928, the first woman to cross the Atlantic alone, May of 1932, setting a new record of 14 hours and 56 minutes. In a lecture at Purdue University, where she later became a career counselor for women, she declared a woman must try to do things as men have tried. When they fail, their failure must be but a challenge to others. That philosophy would lead her directly to her ultimate challenge. But behind the public smile and the records, a mission was taking shape, one that would consume all her resources and perhaps her life. April 1936. The Lockheed Electra 10E, serial number 1055, was no ordinary airplane. It cost $80,000 at the time, roughly $1.7 million today. With its twin Pratt & Whitney Wasp S3H1 engines producing 550 horsepower each, it could carry 1,200 gallons of fuel and reach 202 miles per hour. But the round-the-world flight would cost nearly twice the price of the plane itself. That's where Purdue University came in. Amelia, then a visiting faculty member, inspired her students to raise $30,000, while the university contributed another $50,000. The modifications were extensive and controversial. Passenger seats were removed to install extra fuel tanks, raising capacity from 1,151 to 1,851 gallons. The long-range radio equipment was stripped out to save weight, a decision that would later prove fatal. Her chosen navigator, Fred Noonan, was considered the best in the world, having charted transoceanic routes for Pan Am. But he carried a problem many chose to overlook: alcohol. Pan Am's president, Juan Trippe, once told Amelia, "He's brilliant when he's sober, but you can't rely on him." Planning the route was a geopolitical puzzle. They avoided the Soviet Union due to rising tensions, and the Pacific leg required special permissions from colonial governments. The original plan was to fly east to west, but weather conditions and a crash in Hawaii forced them to reverse the direction. Every detail, from emergency supplies to rations, was calculated with precision. Yet, as events would show, some of those calculations were disastrously wrong. If you were in her place, would you have sacrificed radio range for more fuel? That single decision might have changed everything. With preparations complete, the greatest adventure of her life was about to begin, and so was the countdown to the unknown. Oakland, California, March 17, 1937. The first attempt began with promise, but ended in drama. After successful stops in Tucson, New Orleans, and Miami, they reached Honolulu. There, during takeoff toward Howland, the Electra skidded on the runway, collapsing its landing gear and severely damaging the fuselage. Amelia telegraphed to Putnam, "Plane damaged. We seem doomed to costly delays." The aircraft had to be shipped back to California for repairs that cost $14,000 and took 2 months. The second attempt in June followed the opposite route, east to west. From Oakland, they flew to Tucson, then to New Orleans, Miami, San Juan in Puerto Rico, Carapito in Venezuela, and across South America to Africa. In Natal, Brazil, Amelia wrote in her journal, "The Amazon stretches below like an endless brown serpent. I feel smaller than ever." In Africa, they faced sandstorms that clogged the air filters, and in India, monsoons that nearly forced them to land. In Singapore, Noonan contracted dysentery that weakened him for days. In Darwin, Australia, they performed crucial maintenance and unloaded non-essential equipment to save weight. The final stop before the Pacific was Lae in New Guinea, where they arrived on June 29th. There, calculating the weight for the last leg, they made the critical decision to leave behind the emergency parachute and more radio gear. With 1,100 gallons of fuel, 200 more than recommended, They prepared for the most dangerous flight of their lives. In Lae, an Australian journalist noticed something unsettling in Amelia's eyes. Not fear, but a deep resignation, as if she knew they were crossing a point of no return. Lae, New Guinea, July 2nd, 1937. Dawn broke at 6 in the morning under a heavy, humid heat. Witnesses reported that Amelia seemed unusually serious during the final checks. British Colonial Administrator James Collinson recalled, "She personally inspected every fuel tank, every connection." Noonan looked nervous, going over his charts again and again. The fuel load was so extreme that the Electra needed the entire 1,000-meter runway to take off, its wheels brushing the treetops at the end. The flight plan was complex but precise. Maintain a heading of 157 degrees magnetic toward Howland, an island barely 2.4 kilometers long. Noonan would use celestial navigation, taking sun sights with his sextant. They estimated 18 hours of flight, arriving near dawn when visibility would be better. They carried biscuits, hard-boiled eggs, and thermos flasks of coffee. Amelia packed her journal and a camera to document the achievement. The first hours were uneventful. At 5:20 p.m. local time, the Electra transmitted its position, 150 miles southwest of the Nikumaroro Islands. But then the problems began. They encountered thicker clouds than expected, forcing Noonan to navigate by dead reckoning instead of celestial observation. The easterly winds were stronger than forecast, slowly but steadily pushing them south of their course. Worse still, atmospheric static interfered with communications. Imagine being in that cockpit, watching the fuel drop, and knowing you're drifting off course. Would you have continued or turned back? That single choice defines the line between courage and recklessness. As night fell over the Pacific, aboard the Coast Guard cutter Itasca began a vigil that would soon turn into a nightmare. Aboard the Itasca, anchored near Howland, Captain Warner K. Thompson had meticulously prepared for their arrival. Smoke signals were arranged for daytime and searchlights for the night. Yet there was a fundamental communication problem. Amelia operated on 6,210 kilocycles for long-range transmission and on 3,105 for short-range, while the Itasca primarily transmitted on 500 and 7,500. At 2:45 in the morning, ship time, they received the first message. Clouds and overcast, winds 23 knots, Itasca to Earhart. Transmit on 3,105 so we can take your bearing. I repeat, 3,105. CAC to Itasca. We are 200 miles out and closing. Please take our bearing and respond on 7,500. She can't hear us, Bellarts exclaimed in frustration. She's transmitting on 6,210, but we can only receive her on 500. It's like two deaf people shouting at each other. At 6:14 in the morning, with the dawn breaking, the clearest message arrived. We are above you but cannot see you. Fuel is running low. The Itasca released thick black smoke, visible for 30 miles. At 7:42, the message that still echoes in every investigation. We are on line 157, 337, repeating this message. Finally, at 8:43, the last transmission, nearly inaudible, running north and south. Then, only static. The silence that followed has echoed for 87 years. At that moment, no one aboard the Itasca imagined they were witnessing the birth of one of the 20th century's greatest mysteries. The search was about to begin. The communication failure was not a simple mistake, but a chain of poor decisions and bad luck. The Electra's long-range antenna, a 250-foot cable trailing behind the plane, only worked efficiently in level flight. But Amelia was climbing to gain altitude over the clouds, rendering the antenna nearly useless. In addition, her 50-watt transmitter was insufficient for the distance, especially during the day when radio propagation conditions were worse. The Itasca's equipment was far from ideal. Its radio direction-finding receiver was primitive compared to what Pan Am used in the Pacific. Worse, When Amelia finally switched to 3,105 kilocycles for short-range communication, the Itasca operator had switched to Morse code transmission, assuming she could not hear voice. Aviation historian Rick Gillespie would explain decades later. They were passing notes in a dark room, and each was throwing the other's notes away without reading them. The tragedy deepens when examining the options available. The Electra could have been equipped with a 100-watt radio, but it was rejected to save weight. The Itasca had a more advanced direction-finding receiver in storage, but it was never installed. Even the chosen frequency, 6,210 kilocycles, was problematic during the day due to atmospheric interference. Every technical solution existed, yet none was implemented in time. This perfect storm of failures turned a challenging flight into an inevitable tragedy. Were these technical failures mere bad luck or negligence? Could it have been avoided with better preparation? With communications lost, the largest search in aviation history began, along with the first theories about what really happened. The official United States Navy theory presented in its report of 1937 is simple. The Electra, having run out of fuel, crashed into the ocean and sank quickly. Supporters argue that the mathematical odds favor this version. Finding an island just 2.5 kilometers long in over 4 million square kilometers of ocean was statistically nearly impossible. Admiral Chester Nimitz, who oversaw the search operations, summed it up bluntly. They got lost, ran out of fuel and went into the sea. It's as simple as that. The evidence seems to support this conclusion. The last message indicated critical fuel levels, and no expedition found debris on nearby islands. Ocean currents, especially the South Equatorial Current, would have carried any floating wreckage westward, away from the search areas. Modern computer models suggest the plane could have floated for hours before sinking, explaining the immediate absence of visible remains. But skeptics see it differently. The Electra had emergency flotation devices that should have kept parts of the fuselage afloat. Seats and other light components should have surfaced. More unsettling, radio transmission analyses conducted in 1991 indicate that Amelia may have been sending messages up to 5 days after her disappearance, suggesting they survived the initial impact. If the plane sank immediately, how do we explain these possible later signals? Yet there is a ghost island in the Pacific where the evidence tells a completely different story. Theory 2. The Island of Bones. Nikumaroro, formerly called Gardner Island, is an uninhabited atoll of 7.5 square kilometers, located 560 kilometers southeast of Howland. In 1940, British colonial officer Gerald Gallagher discovered 13 human bones under a tree, near what appeared to be a small fire. Alongside them, he found a marine sextant, a pair of women's boots, and a bottle of Benedictine liqueur, a brand Amelia knew well. The bones were sent to Fiji for analysis and mysteriously vanished. Only the measurements survived, which Dr. Hoodless of the Fiji School of Medicine attributed to a robust man of European origin. Decades later, in 1998, forensic anthropologist Dr. Richard Jantz reanalyzed those same measurements using modern technology. His conclusion was as precise as it was startling. The proportions of the radius and humerus matched those of a woman of Earhart's height and ethnic background with more than 99% probability. The strongest evidence appeared in 1991, when the T-Hi-Ha group found an aluminum fragment that matched exactly the patch installed in Miami to replace a window of the Electra. Metallurgical analysis confirmed it was 24ST aluminum, typical of the pre-war era and used exclusively in that aircraft model. Subsequent expeditions added more pieces to the puzzle. A woman's shoe size 9, the size of Amelia, a cosmetics jar of her known brand, and remains that could belong to her radio equipment. In 2012, a declassified aerial photograph from 1937 showed an object that could be the Electra's landing gear, stranded on the reef. Dr. Tighar's theory holds that Amelia and Fred Noonan survived on the island for weeks, perhaps months, before succumbing to dehydration or illness. With all this physical evidence, why do you think the government has never officially acknowledged this theory? What piece is still missing to close the case definitively? As the evidence from the island accumulates, a darker theory emerges from the shadows of war. Theory 3. The Japanese Shadow. The most controversial theory suggests that Amelia and Fred were captured by the Japanese after mistakenly landing in the Marshall Islands, which were under Japanese mandate. Evidence includes testimonies from islanders who reported seeing a white woman and a tall man with the Japanese in Saipan in 1937. Even more striking, in 1944, U.S. Marine Robert Wallach claimed to have found a briefcase containing Amelia's documents in a Japanese safe captured in Saipan. Supporters point to the geopolitical context. Japan was illegally fortifying Pacific Islands in violation of international treaties. If Amelia flew over these installations, she could have been considered a spy. This would explain the massive rescue operation authorized by President Roosevelt. 9 ships, 66 aircraft, costing $4 million at the time. Was it simply humanitarian concern or a mission to recover compromised intelligence? The counter-evidence is equally compelling. No Japanese documents mention her capture, despite thorough record-keeping. The islanders' testimonies are contradictory and collected years later. Intelligence expert William Stanford evaluates, if the Japanese captured Earhart, they would have used her for propaganda, not hidden her. Yet the persistence of this theory reflects our fascination with conspiracies and the grim reality of pre-war tensions. As these theories compete, modern technology promises definitive answers from the depths of the ocean. The Eternal Search. The original search in 1937 was the most costly and extensive in naval history up to that point. It covered 250,000 square miles of ocean over 16 days. The battleship Colorado, the aircraft carrier Lexington, and 19 destroyers participated. They found nothing. For decades, searches were sporadic and poorly equipped, but the 21st century brought a technological revolution. The Nautilus project in 2012 used remotely operated vehicles with side-scan sonar capable of detecting objects the size of a soda can at 6,000 meters depth. In 2017, the Ocean Infinity team deployed autonomous robots that mapped the seafloor with 10-centimeter resolution. Artificial intelligence now analyzes millions of satellite and historical images, searching for patterns impossible for the human eye to detect. Yet the challenge remains monumental. The potential search area covers 20,000 square miles of extremely rugged underwater terrain, with 6,000-meter trenches and submarine mountains. The cost of a full expedition exceeds $5 million. Still, every year new teams with advanced technology emerge, obsessed with solving the mystery. As explorer Robert Ballard says, "We are not looking for a plane, we are looking for answers for history." If you had $5 million to search, where would you invest it? In the sea around Howland, on Nikumaroro, or in Japanese archives? And just when the mystery seemed eternal, in 2024, what could be the definitive discovery emerged? January 2024. Tony Romeo, a former Air Force pilot and CEO of Deep Sea Vision, announced the most promising discovery in decades: a sonar image showing what appears to be an intact Electra 10E at 5,000 meters depth, 160 kilometers west of Howland. The image revealed a shape with 2 engines and a tail strikingly matching Amelia's plane. Romeo invested $11 million of his own fortune in the search, using a state-of-the-art sonar mounted on a submarine drone. But immediately critical questions arose. Why is the plane so far from its planned route? Experts note that currents could not have carried a sunken plane that far. Why is it intact after 87 years on the ocean floor? Skeptics argue that the Electra should have disintegrated on impact or been consumed by marine organisms. Oceanographer Dr. Michael Harris warns, I have seen rock formations that look like planes. We need video footage. Deep Sea Vision plans a verification expedition in 2025 with ROVs capable of retrieving artifacts. The technical challenge is immense, operating at 5,000 meters depth under 500 atmospheres of pressure. If the discovery is confirmed, legal questions arise. Who owns the plane? Earhart's heirs? The United States government? Meanwhile, the world holds its breath, waiting for the ocean, after 87 years, to finally reveal its secrets. But regardless of what is found in the depths, Amelia's true legacy transcends any archaeological discovery. Amelia Earhart is not famous primarily for how she disappeared, but for how she lived. In an era where women were systematically discouraged from pursuing technical careers, she proved that courage and competence have no gender. Her influence on female aviation is immeasurable. The WASPs, Women Air Force Service pilots of the Second World War, the astronauts of the Mercury program, today's commercial pilots, all stood on her wings. But her enduring mystery touches something deeper in the human psyche. In our era of GPS and satellites, where every inch of the planet is mapped, her story reminds us that the world was once full of blank spaces where you could disappear. She represents the last great terrestrial adventure before technology erased the unknown. As she herself wrote, the worth of a thing is in the adventure itself. Perhaps that is why we keep searching for her, not just her, but the part of ourselves that longs for the unexplored. The words of her last book resonate with tragic prophecy. For a time I felt the freedom of the sky was mine. Up there in that immense blue, everything seems possible, even eternity. Her final silence became the most eloquent echo of her extraordinary life. As long as people look to the sky and ask, what happened to Amelia? Her spirit of adventure will remain alive, inspiring generations to reach heights others call impossible. This story has no ending. Yet. Subscribe for the final chapter when the mystery is resolved. And tell us in the comments, what do you think the 2025 expedition will discover in the depths of the Pacific? The debate, like the search, continues.